ahead and call to order the regular December meeting of the Rappahannock County Planning Commission, Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. 6 out of the 7 members of the Planning Commission are present, so we have a quorum. If you'd please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. An agenda was properly posted to our BoardDocs system for the public's review. I would propose for tonight, in light of our agenda item related to the draft sign ordinance, I would like to strike under old business F1 golf driving ranges and move that into the new year. I would also like, because we have 2 preliminary reviews, and hopefully you're okay with this, I would like to swap old business and new business in order so that the Thornhills and then Ms. Wagner can have their time before we get into a discussion of the draft sign ordinance. With those 2 proposed changes, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Why did you want to scratch the golf driving ranges?
Because we are finally going to be talking about the draft sign ordinance, and I think we can just focus our efforts there tonight. I think that's a higher priority right now for the county generally. And then again, I'd like to swap old and new business in order.
I don't have any objection to that. I'll move to accept.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ishii. Sir,
Second.
thank you, Mr. Light. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, the adoption of the minutes from the November 17th regular meeting. I've reviewed the minutes and hope you all have too, and thank you again to Ms. Lee for her great recording of everything that happened in what was a busy meeting ultimately. I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes from the November 17th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one change to ask for.
Okay.
So that would be on page 3, the 11th paragraph, line 3, add Miss Ishii after Mr. Sharp to recognize that I also voted on that.
Okay, so you're talking, is that the last paragraph prior to the public comment heading?
Yes.
Okay. So the motion carried with a roll call vote, Mr. Schul, Mr. Kohler, Mr. Sharp, Ms. Ishii, and Mr. Light voting aye. Is that correct?
That should be correct.
Okay, great. With that change, I will entertain a motion to adopt the minutes from the November 17th meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Light. Second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is a general public comment period, and that's an opportunity for members of the public to make any comments they wish on matters of relevance to the Planning Commission, of interest to them. So with that, I will open the public comment period. And again, any comments related to Planning Commission members are in play here. Anyone wishing to speak? Okay, I'll close the public comment period. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have swapped old and new business. So the first order of business is a preliminary review of special use permit number 21-12-01, Thornhill tax map number 56.20-27A, and this is an application for a tourist home. Ms. Summers, if you could just briefly walk us through the materials related to the application, and then if the applicant wants to make any brief remarks, you're welcome to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, this property in 2017 obtained a special use permit for a family apartment for the structure that they are currently proposing to turn into a 1-bedroom tourist home. The health department, they approved a 1-bedroom septic in 2017, and VDOT has no objections to this request.
Anyone, either one of you want to?
His wife and children are in the process of moving out, so we wanted to do the Airbnb for 2022.
Okay. And then the total acreage of the property?
22.
22, okay, great. All right, thank you. Again, this is a preliminary review. Ms. Summers, do you deem the application complete,
Yes, sir.
containing everything required? Okay. I'll just work down the row. I'm starting with Mr. Schulen to see if anyone has any questions for the Thornhills.
Not this time.
My only question, this is a 22 acre parcel?
Yes.
And is it surrounded by your other property?
What do you mean?
Do you have other property that adjoins it, or do you have other property that adjoins it? It's a barn, correct?
We have a farm that's across the way. This 22 acres is before the farm.
I see, okay, thank you. That's all.
It's not part of.
I just want to ask, Ms. Summers, if the road frontage meets the requirements of our ordinance on this, do you know?
It is located along, the state maintained road.
Okay, so the answer is yes, it does. I take it, that's what you're
Yes.
saying, yeah, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Mr. Henry?
I don't have any questions. I think this is a very straightforward, simple, existing building that we can forward on to the next body for their approval and consideration instead of going through this, a public hearing next month.
Okay.
There's nothing complicated here.
Mr. Light?
I agree with Mr. Henry. I remember when we went through this with the family apartment. I didn't visit the property this time, but I did at that time, and I'm prepared to move, as per Mr. Henry's comment, that we forward this to whatever the next body is with a recommendation of approval.
Okay, great. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to send this on to the Board of Zoning Appeals with a recommendation for approval.
I'll make the motion.
Oh, I thought I just made it.
Oh, you had, okay. I should,
I'll make a second.
I should be more nimble.
I'll make a second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Light, for the motion you made that I missed. All right, and a second from Mr. Henry. Any further discussion?
Just my kind of standing concern with this, that the only way anybody would know that this was on our agenda, because it's a preliminary review and not noticed as a hearing, is if they had if they thought to go into, onto BoardDocs and go to our agenda for tonight and click onto the agenda and then go to this, and then they would find out that this was being considered by the Planning Commission. That's just kind of a continuing problem here, as opposed to a hearing. If we had noticed it, it would have gone in the newspaper for 2 weeks and people could have at least seen it. So I think this also looks like a pretty straightforward application, and really can't anticipate any real problems with it. But I just think in general, again, that it's not a good practice to put things forward, certainly with a recommendation when we haven't heard from anybody in the public on it. So I will abstain from that vote.
Okay, and yeah, and thank you. Points well taken. And in the new year, hopefully we can make some progress in straightening out the system by which we handle these applications, and also how the county handles these tourist home applications. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to send to the Board of Zoning Appeals with a recommendation for approval. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Ms. Ishii, you're abstaining.
I'll abstain also.
Okay.
On the same grounds.
Okay. Thank you very much. So you know the process.
That's next meeting, next Wednesday?
It won't,
Be in touch.
yeah, and, yep, thanks for coming out, and good luck with your knee. Good seeing you too, David. Deja vu all over again. Okay. Next, under new business is a preliminary review of special use permit number 21-12-02. This is Wagner, tax map number 32-14D, a different tax map number than we saw previously. This is a kennel/dog training center, as defined in our zoning ordinance. Ms. Summers, if you would just briefly catch us up
Mr.
on.
Chairman, I'm going to recuse from this because I have a business relationship with the owner of the property.
Okay, thank you very much for the heads up and taking that approach. Ms. Summers, if you just catch us up?
Sure, thank you. So this property is located on Route 211 beside Armada Winery. The property is zoned agricultural and it's 22 acres in size. The existing barn on the property will be rehabilitated and used as the training space for classes. The applicant does propose a new metal building to be constructed at a later time. 2 yards will be fenced. Hours of operation will vary between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., which I think has been revised. Operating an average of 40 to 50 hours per week, closed on Sundays. Again, no overnight boarding or kenneling. And the health department did comment that there is an approved septic system on the property that serves the current 2-bedroom tenant house. The owners plan to investigate the possibility of connecting the bathroom with the proposed training facility. In the meantime, they plans to use portable privy. The health department has no objections to that, provided that there's a portable hand sink to be provided by the same providers of the sewage. And by the end of the first year, that an approved septic system solution has been permitted, installed, and approved. VDOT commented that the existing private entrance off Route 211 serving the property meets the VDOT low volume commercial entrance standards along with stopping and sight distance. If they find that it needs to be upgraded, it will need to be, and then any work that is done will need a permit through them, but they don't have any objections at this time.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Wagner, do you want to make any comments since you're back with us and maybe just tell us your plan? Sure, please. Your updated plan. Yeah.
Okay, so this is our second go around with this. It's a new property. So after our last hearing, I heard you guys. I definitely took into consideration the concerns that you guys kind of brought to my attention, things like traffic, things like, distance from neighbors, things like noise complaints. So after the last meeting, different options presented themselves to me. And I was like, well, I'm open to entertaining the idea of finding something more suitable, taking into consideration what we kind of found out through the last 2 meetings with the other parcel. So first of all, this one is 22 acres instead of 12, so I've got twice the amount of size. That definitely means that it's more than 700 feet to any adjoining property, so we've got a lot more distance. If you look at the map on the actual document, you'll see I put the plat over a Google Maps image, and it actually shows that there's an existing tree line. Where we intend to put the training center is actually going to mirror Armada Winery, which is obviously already commercial use. And our parking lot, which is what number A is, or what letter A is, our parking lot would mirror theirs. We'd have our training building along the tree line, and then the 2 parks are C and D. And there is an existing road currently. VDOT did say that we should add some extra gravel to the entrance because it's a little bit sparse there, just to make the transition from the road a little bit easier. And we're basically going to use that existing driveway and extend it behind the barn in order for people to get access to our new facilities. It is barely visible from 211. Granted, there are multiple buildings like this on 211 already, but the only way that you can see it is coming westbound. You see it for a split second as you pass Armada. So I don't believe that it will have any impact on the county in terms of aesthetics. And then we also plan to plant additional trees along the perimeter and the fence line, once again to kind of obstruct view and to hinder sound a little bit further. Now, I did walk around the property. One of the things that I've added is we are going to be putting my horse and my goats there too. So in the larger field in the top left corner where there's an additional square, we're going to be using that area for livestock so that it also is being used for agricultural purposes. And so, yeah, we do have a tenant on there right now. She's lovely. She is a dog lover. There's actually a lot of dog people in that neighborhood, in that area. I went door to door and spoke to each neighbor and introduced myself and gave them a preliminary review of what our plans are and tried to address any concerns. We did get signatures out of the 8 homes that I saw. One was unavailable, I did not reach them, they weren't home. One was undecided, one was concerned about barking and noise complaints, but 5 of the others did give me signatures and wanted to support this initiative. The tenant who lives there also is excited about this prospect, and she plans on staying there. And we'd be happy to have her and be able to offer rental opportunities in the community. So, yeah, it's pretty much the breakdown.
Great, thanks a lot. We'll go through this again, perhaps more briefly than last time. Mr. Schulin, we'll just start with you if you have questions or anything you want to.
I think you met what we were looking for, and as far as the traffic is concerned, I think it's a great location. The fact that it does mirror up against another commercial, in my mind, a commercial property. You've kept it away from the neighbors. I don't see dog noise as an issue.
There are 2 neighbors that have 5 dogs each, and those dogs can be heard from the property and the adjoining properties. When I went door to door, I did hear dogs kind of barking from different properties around, and I'm like, well, at least we'll control ours a little better, maybe.
Well,
Yeah.
business opportunity for you, maybe.
Potentially, yes. Some of them were excited, and we did want to extend kind of our parks and our fenced-in area to the neighbors if they want to socialize their dogs and join us for classes and offer discounts.
I think this is a much better location.
And if you see, actually, the cool part is on 211, there's a slow-down lane coming up to it eastbound, so you actually have a designated slow-down lane to turn. Plus, it has that bypass right over between the 2 lanes, so it is directly opposite of the entrance, so no matter where you're going, like, we don't even have to make U-turns to enter or
Yeah, it'd be
exit.
nice that you won't have people leaving your place and
Going in the
immediately
opposite
going
direction.
the wrong way.
Yeah, we avoid that issue altogether.
Thanks, Brian.
So thanks for your perseverance. There's clearly been a lot of effort onto this. There are ways in which this is definitely an improved site, but there are some things that I'll just alert you to. This is just a preliminary review tonight, so I assume we'll try to move this on to a public hearing. I would hope that would be where we would go. But a couple of things I noticed. Well, just in general, yeah, this is, in some ways, it's useful in my mind that it's adjacent to another commercial use, but in some ways, that's a bit of a drawback in that I don't think we want a commercial alley necessarily fronting along there. So I think one thing that, in my mind at least, would be important is maintaining the screening that is there. I wasn't able to get by in the daylight, so I didn't get a real good sense of the screening, but keeping it in the back and keeping as much screening as possible so that it doesn't look like
These
a big.
trees to the west.
Yeah.
So the nice thing is,
Well, all of
if you
them,
look,
in the front as well.
if you look in the actual program, I actually did some research on different trees. And what we're planning on doing is planting a variety of aesthetically pleasing trees, but also some evergreens to create wind barriers and to create buffers. So that's definitely something that in the drawing, I kind of just did it in the corner at Normata. But to be honest, I'm more interested in putting a tree line and basically creating some of a buffer around the perimeter of the property, for sure.
And are you planning on maintaining all the trees and vegetation that
Yes,
is
there are some
already?
dead ones that we have to take out, and at the entrance, there's some autumn olives that have kind of crowded that haven't been maintained, so we'll be cleaning that up, but the rest of the vegetation, we've got so much flat land and open land to deal with that we don't have to remove anything. If anything, we'd be adding a little bit more.
Okay, because I do think that vegetation would help
Oh, it definitely
maintain
does. It
the
definitely does.
sense of rural character there as opposed to a commercial alley.
Absolutely.
And so thank you for that. And further, did you have a dog yard, a dog park area in your
Yes.
prior application?
Yes.
I guess I didn't pick up on
So
that.
that's number C. That's what number C is.
And D is the agility area?
B would be the actual facility, the metal building. So the yellow is the barn that we're rehabbing. B would be the initial pole barn. C would be the dog park, and D would be the agility arena.
Okay, thank you. And the dog park would be strictly for your clients?
Yes.
It would not in any way be open to the
No.
public? That
I
would
can't
be,
vet the dogs in the public. I can't risk my clients' dogs. One of the appeals of joining us is we've always got people's backs. And I'm not interested in being open to the public and dog fights breaking out. So no, it will be part, we have a club membership basically, and it'll be part of the club membership.
I think that might be an important element of the application, as much as I think that, you know, dog training could be a good use in an agricultural area. I've also been somebody who's frequented dog parks in previous lives,
dangerous.
and they are very
It is
loud and very dangerous.
And yeah, for us, and the way, it's not gonna be a free-for-all. We're always gonna have the owners with their dogs or a staff member. So our human to dog ratio, our human ratio will always be higher than our dog ratio. But realistically, when they're playing, and the way we've done these classes in the past, is we let the dogs play, we recall them, we put them in stays, we let them chill out. We send them off again, let them play, and before they get too overstimulated where fights and things can happen, we settle them down again so that they learn to play but not be super overstimulated where you've got chasing and barking and fighting and all that.
Sure, okay, thank you. Another question, in your other prior proposal, I believe it stated that you would not be training police dogs, detection dogs,
We're
or
not
personal.
training police dogs, yeah.
So you didn't have that in this, was that just an oversight?
No, that was just an oversight,
Okay,
no.
great. Water usage and well, I think if I remember right from your previous application, you didn't have a septic area there now, so now you're gonna have the porta potty, and so I'm not quite sure of how that works out, but I can follow up on that to figure out how the well and.
Sure.
And all
So
that
there
would-
is a well, and there's 3 spigots throughout the property. That are, one is near the house, one is near a stone cottage that is there, and one is on the other side of the field. So we have access to water. Primarily, the porta potty thing is because I don't want the tenant to vacate the property, I would like to keep her on. We don't have access to the bathroom immediately. So by having a porta potty, we allow options for people who obviously need to use the bathroom. And that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. Often we do lessons at Spillman Park, which is right on Colvin Road, and all that is accessible is a porta potty. And people come for an hour, so some of them, if they know there's a porta potty and they don't want to use it, they plan their breaks accordingly. But for us right now, we do still go on the road and we will still be seeing clients at their homes as well as the facility. So we just want to make sure that there's an option available to people.
Okay, thank you, and just 2 last questions. The expanded hours, now you're proposing to have them basically from 9 AM to 8 PM, 6 days a week. And that puts it a little earlier in the morning and also after dark.
It should say 10 AM.
Oh, I thought in your business proposal it said, but you mean 10, okay.
Sorry, it should
That's
say
okay,
10.
but you're also planning to go 8 PM, which may be after dark during part of the year, so you would need lights.
Sure. That's for when we have the indoor facility, because the indoor facility will be lit.
Okay.
Yep.
And you had also said in your last proposal that you would be considering having like shows and events there. And so I don't know how you would be planning to restrict the attendance at those. Or
To be honest, this is a slightly larger project now than it had been with the previous application. So if that, it's not in my mind right now, but if in a few years' time, if we decide to have special events, it would be a matter of getting a permit for that weekend and ensuring that it's okay for the county to have something for a special use for that weekend. I don't foresee us being so busy or having the ability to host events on a regular basis where it would fall outside the scope of the permit.
Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Now, have you talked with Mrs. Patel next door?
Yes, I have.
How's her reception?
She's very excited about it. She's one of the person who provided a signature on our proactive petition.
Good.
Yep.
She's made her and her late husband made a substantial investment there, and it's a very attractive facility, and her support is very meaningful. It's very nice of Chris Parrish to sacrifice his property here, his ownership of it for you to be
Yes.
able to move to such a better location for you.
It was very generous.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a little history of this property. Properties come with family division rights and things like this. Now, just so that going into this property, you know where you are and what you have. This property has no family division rights.
Okay.
Did you know that?
No.
You might want to look into the history
Okay.
of the zoning uses here, because over time, all the division rights on multiple hundreds of acres have been used up here. This was kind of a division that happened in the 1980s, and the original property extended back onto 637, back to property that Mr. Tapp owned. And the gentleman that lived here was a descendant of the McCormick family.
Okay.
And he got into love late in life and got taken by a red-headed woman.
I heard it was a house fire.
Well, his money got,
I did hear that part.
the property ended up going into a trust, and he was heartbroken, his health diminished, and so the property was sold off and divided and things like this. And at one time, all this property on 211 was 5-acre lots.
Okay.
And then the zoning changed, and it became what it is today. But even after the zoning change, we had a policy that if, for example, you bought 200 acres out of a property that was 600 acres in size, and the 600 acres had 24 division rights if it was a perfect site, 1 per 25 acres, the first person that came in the door could use the division rights. And so the person that may have bought 100 acres, if he rushed in the door real quick, could use up 24 rights.
Oh, wow.
Even though he only had 4. So this affected a lot of people around there. So this is a little history. So if you wanted to give your dad a lot, or your
Yeah.
dad wanted to give you a lot,
Yeah.
or something in here, I think basically the terminology you would have is that this is probably a non-common open space
Okay.
if he was in a metropolitan area.
I do know that it was originally, just recently, part of a larger parcel, and
the
it was
reason that
just,
happened,
yep,
the
lastly
reason it was a
divided,
boundary
yeah.
adjustment because there was no division rights.
Uh-huh,
So the only thing that could be done was a lot adjusted to the
Yes,
adjoining
so it was
property,
sold to a neighbor,
no new lots
yeah.
would be created.
yeah.
So I don't want you to think that maybe 10 years from down the road, part of your plan was to, your dad take a lot, or you
I
take a
don't really
lot.
plan on dividing it.
So, just so that you know where you are.
Thank you.
So
Thank
you can check all this with Michelle and with the history of the out conveyances. And I think,
Okay.
I used to live there, and I had
Oh.
bought a piece of this farm a long time ago. And so I speak with some accuracy of
Well, thank you.
historical events. So I support your application, and when it comes to a vote, based upon what I see, I'll support it.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for that.
I'll finish, all yours.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate the efforts, solid application. I was trying to do a little bit of the, how is this different than the last one, other than, in terms of the operational activities? You say, we already talked about a little bit about it being a slightly bigger, I guess a little longer operation. Could you say a little bit more about the difference in what you're proposing to do here versus the
So
previous one?
it's practically the same. The main difference is I definitely want to add a gate to it because it's right on 211. And the reason I put the hours the way that I did there is that basically the hours of operation are not necessarily when classes are going to be held, but when the first person enters the property and when the last person leaves. So in the last program, we had, classes up to 7 o'clock. But if we do admin work for an hour afterwards, the gate would be locked at 8 o'clock at night. And because sometimes we have a half day where we go visit people in their homes, and then we have a half day where we're on the facility, and our time is kind of split between those two things. That's why there's a variation on the hours, because we probably won't be there that full amount, but that is the hours that we provide our services.
Thank you. And I'll just take the liberty, since I'm last in the string here, if I may, I move that we advance this to a public hearing. I do agree that this is another one where it's not quite the slam dunk, and I generally support the policy that Ms. Ishii brought up, that for things that are just not so obviously the same as what's sort of happening there now, like a 2-bedroom tourist home, I do think hearing from the neighbors, especially if we have indications of some concerns, is called for. So I hereby move that we schedule a public hearing at our next regular meeting.
I'll second that. And I would just add on that I guess I think it's, as it was previously, a good application. And I'd like to for my part, I'd like to see that the things that you're committing to are made part of the application, because I know that there have been other if this is to the scale and proposal that you're laying out, then it's one thing, but if somebody else comes in and takes it over or as we've seen in other kind of unusual business ventures on commercial or conservation, ag or conservation properties, they come in with an initial application, and then within a year, they want to expand it and change it. And so I think that we ought to look at this in terms of what should be there permanently, and not necessarily think of this as just the first foray. So anyway, but I'll second that.
Great. A motion and a second to schedule a public hearing at our next regular meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your perseverance.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, and sorry we kind of turned the agenda upside down at the beginning. So now we're going to move on to old business. We have the luxury of having our county administrator, Mr. Curry, here, which is super helpful. And Mr. Curry, I wonder if you just very briefly, a minute or less, just tell us where we are in the Berkeley Group agreement or work order. And then related to the next item, which is a review of the draft sign ordinance, maybe you could comment on the extent to which, if we were to, my thinking is maybe we'll after tonight's initial review of the draft, maybe we would schedule a work session for early January. And in that context, I wonder if we would benefit from someone from the Berkeley Group sitting with us during that process.
We'll take them in order.
Thank you.
Regarding the Berkeley Group, we don't have a signed work order yet. And just the reason I did that is more toward the end of the conversation of how much do you want them to be involved in the sign ordinance? And I thought that might be dependent on your first view of that document. And so their time equals our money.
Good.
And our opportunity for them to do other things.
Okay.
You guys could just take that downstairs.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you need any more information on Berkeley Group right now.
No,
We're
I think
trying to tie that up over the next, several weeks to month, but it really depends on some guidance from you on.
Whether they should jump in on this
Yeah.
or
So you've got $20,000 for the next 6 months. They've got probably $30,000 of work they could do if we want them all in on the sign ordinance and all in on the event stuff, plus the full diagnostic.
right.
So we can do that, it'll just take some time and work into next year, or we can focus them on the diagnostic work and get that core part done, like you were talking about before, that process and procedure to get to some of the questions about, this preliminary review and all those things that are in our ordinance now.
Yep.
Is that what we want to do? It's not exactly in line with the Code of Virginia. It provides greater access from the public to provide input the way we do it, but it takes longer for the person who wants to get
Right.
an application. So
Okay.
I think that's the important part for Berkeley Group.
Okay, that makes sense. So why don't you just walk us through where we are on the sign ordinance, and then we can make a judgment afterwards about whether to engage them on this. Thanks a lot.
So first, let me say, when we were here talking to you before, we thought probably would start completely fresh. And Art took it as a task to do that. And when I ultimately got a draft from him, he changed direction and went back to editing what we already have. He felt that he could do that, and afterwards I joined him in a way that would probably be able to do what we need to do relative to Reed versus Town of Gilbert, and keep it in a form that's more understandable and comfortable for the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, possibly the public, who have dealt with our ordinance in the past. So you can, make your own judgment on whether this draft does that. But in total, the goal here is to remove every instance of any sort of content-based regulation. That is replaced in some locations as you go through with site-based regulation. So if your site has a gas station, you can have this big of a sign. Doesn't tell you what you can put on your sign, but you can have this big of a sign. And if the next property over is not a gas station, well, you can't have the same size signs. And so it handles it that way. Real estate signs, something we used to regulate in the past. You can have this size real estate sign. Well, that's content-based, and we really didn't want to go there. But if you have a property that's for sale, you can have a temporary sign of this size. Now, you can advertise whatever you want, I guess, for a temporary period, but the property has to be for sale. And most likely, if the property's for sale, they're gonna want to put a real estate sign on the property. So those sort of things you'll see embedded in the document. Mr. Goff prepared this intent in 17092 to try to hammer home the foundation of the ordinance as he saw it related to the recent court action, to set the basis should it be challenged in the future or anything that we do that would roll back to here. And then you can see in there, he also noted a severability language. So if something in here is found to be not constitutionally valid or found to be not valid for some reason, then we're overtly stating that the rest would still remain valid. And the court would ultimately decide all that. But at least we're saying it up front. Anybody who reads it should be able to understand that up front. And you have copies, or it's on the board. You can see through the definitions, several were deleted, and many, and there may be some cleanup still needed here, but many of these definitions were spoken to specifically in other sections like temporary signs, or different types of uses could have different types of signs. And so once you delete a lot of that, some of these definitions just fell out. It's not being necessary anymore. For animated sign, this draft, and this is a key point, and you can see, go up a little bit, it does continue to keep the prohibition on animated signs, but it allows for some forms of wind-driven animated signs, not flashing lights, in commercial areas. And so that's a big point that this body will have to think about. So do you want the feather flappy signs or flags? Do you want commercial people, businesses to be able to, not business, but commercial zone property, to be able to have a certain number and area of those types of things? Our thought is, generally, there are a lot of these around. And if the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors ultimately want to confirm that we don't want these, then staff will be writing notices of violation. And so if we think they're okay out there in front of the co-op or wherever, then get them in the ordinance and make it say that it's okay in certain numbers and quantities and sizes. Otherwise, everybody's gonna know they're not allowed, therefore they should be a violation.
Isn't there a less aggressive way to go about that? Say you adopt an ordinance and the next day you send a note to those businesses?
Oh, no, because they're illegal now. And so we've held off on that while this is being worked on.
Okay.
And this all came to a head COVID time, probably like 3 years ago, I don't know, but when another animated sign was going through the permitting process, the local lawyer decided to drive up and down the road and find every single sign that had a violation and send it into our staff to look at. So we started going down enforcement and then finally said, okay, board said, wait, we're gonna change these ordinances. Let's focus on the ordinance. So we're not gonna take somebody to court if the ordinance is about to change. So key point, these commercial flags. So you could regulate the allowable height, the allowable area, the allowable number, the location relative to the property line or the road. You can do all those things. But just know that they're a category and you have to decide whether they're appropriate or not. And you'll probably want to see what the public thinks. Flip that next page.
The sort of the preamble language that goes to Reed v. Gilbert, where did our county attorney extract this from? I assume this is not.
Yeah, you'd have to ask Art. I can't.
But it's not, I don't think it's our original attorney work product, is it?
I do not know.
Okay.
Sorry. I did, Michelle noted in, when she conveyed this to you, the green highlights are sections that really need your attention or need to be filled in later through votes. And one of those was this definition at the bottom of area of a sign. You see these, I don't know, maybe it's like, if you've been down to Opal recently, you see that the Royal Farms has a big chicken outside their building. There's actually a big blown-up chicken out by the road that's temporary, and then they have the statue of a chicken. That's a sign. How would you measure that 3D sign? And how do you lump it into the rest of the signage you're allowed to have? So this little definition of area of a sign, E, is intended to say, it's a horizontal projection and blah, blah, blah. So somehow, if you're allowed to have, if you want them to have a chicken, because they sell chicken, and they just want a 3D sign instead of a 2D sign, I guess you can allow that. But you gotta be able to measure it, if we want to enforce it. And we thought we'd probably develop a diagram, which we haven't done. Building frontage is used throughout the document, but for commercial signage and how much you can have, the more frontage you have, the bigger sign you can have. But there's no definition of what building frontage was, how you might measure it, and whether it was clear that, for example, maybe the Sperryville Schoolhouse, you can see it from 211, and then you can see it from 522 going over the bridge. So those are two different frontages that might have two different sign allotments, and so every side of the building would have its own frontage. If you have a building with roads all around it, then that would define the frontage, and that's trying to set that forward. Let's see. So once you get down the line, 185, 179 and 185, the definition for signs, this is very similar to what was recommended before. And it just clarifies that, and the definition for sign is not changing, but C is added that a sign is not public art as hereinafter permitted. And Mr. Goff and I went back and forth on how to do this. Should public art be permitted or not? Should it just be excluded from the ordinance? And it's either, if it's a sign, it gets a permit. If it's public art, not a sign, you just do whatever you want to do. What this draft ultimately does, and we'll get to it, is that you would be permitting public art in the zoning ordinance as a separate article. So it's later at the end of the zoning ordinance.
What's the difference? You all struck lines 157 through 160 for outdoor advertising sign, but yet retained this language in 120, between line 129 and 132 regarding billboard.
It was probably chasing back where it was referenced, and that later reference was deleted.
Okay.
But we can, I think all these definitions probably need a good run through.
Okay, yeah.
The narrative needs to be run through again to see if any other definitions that need to be added.
Okay.
And so real estate sign, we talked about that a little bit earlier. We don't need to define a real estate sign because we're not going to read a sign to find out whether you can have it or where you can put it. Shopping center signs, kind of similar. We don't have shopping centers, and we don't want to give extra signs if we had a shopping center, I think.
Is that why you took those out? That wasn't because it was content-based? The
No,
shopping center?
no,
and the
because it would be a
subdivision?
location-based, but. 17094 permit required. So this section, while it's called permit required, it's pretty much all about where you don't need a permit. Because it says no sign shall be erected unless you get a permit, except for all the rest of the paragraphs in this section. And so in that, if you look down to line 218, you have flags, emblems, or insignia, United States, ... Foreign national flag was added to that, and historical flags were added to that. That is, generally allowed. If you don't have these things in here, and not that we do zoning in Little Washington, because that's a town thing, if they have some French flag flying out there, that would be an animated sign rather than being an allowable flag. So we really don't need to get in the business of whether you're flying a U.S. flag or a French flag or an Italian flag. Why do we want to regulate that? Go ahead and fly your flag. and historical flags as well. So if you want to do the Betsy Ross Circle Star, I mean, go ahead.
So you're saying absent a flag definition, then it defaults to moving sign or animated sign?
Right, if it's not exempted from getting a permit,
I see.
you know.
I'm with you. Okay.
And just out of curiosity, where were you going with historical flags? What was your intent there?
Well, like the Betsy Ross flag, or, you know, if you have a current United States flag, it's a national flag, great, but what if you have one of the iterations between, you know, the
Okay.
first one and this one, and any number of other historical flags?
Okay.
Using directional language is tied back to that preamble, and it ties into some of the Reed Gilbert stuff relative to what you can regulate, and that's used a little later, and that's why that word was inserted there. And some of these other words are just cleaned up. Get down to section O and 246, again, this is a whole list of signs that you don't need to get a permit for, right? So if you want it, and this O was temporary political signs, we're not talking about what kind of temporary sign you have, right? So if you have a temporary sign not exceeding 4 square feet, you can do it, right? Doesn't need a permit, don't come to Michelle every time you want to put a, what does Art say? Hope has no home here? Every time you want to put one of those in your yard, we're not going to issue a permit. That would be onerous to track and monitor. That's the intent of that section.
So,
And so those, P was a different type of temporary sign, so it's just totally stricken.
so political signs, campaign signs fall into this temporaries?
If they're forced, now, if you want to put a big political sign, then you're going to have to get a permit. You can change that, of course. But a big temporary sign, you're going to have to get a permit. You could increase the threshold of temporary signs that don't need a permit. Or you can require all temporary signs to get a permit. But that's a lot of paperwork that people aren't going to know that they have to do, and it's going to lead to a lot of fights with neighbors, and we just don't need to go there.
Okay.
So then, 250 is what I was telling you about real estate signs. So temporary signs not exceeding 32 square feet located in any lot or parcel that's for sale. So, if you have a lot or parcel for sale, you can have a bigger temporary sign without a permit. Some of these parcels, Mr. Schulen and Mr. Henry know, stay for sale for a very long time. And the big sign stays out there for years and years and years and years.
So I guess you've given us good examples of the thought process and things that we have to consider. And it's very evident that you and Mr. Goff put a lot of time into this, and in addition to the law, you put a lot of common sense into it.
We're trying.
Yeah, well, you have. But sometimes common sense is not readily recognized by numerous people. So, you know, we're talking about whether to take this document here and basically address the green areas, right?
Well, the green areas draw your attention, but the whole document is open for discussion of whether,
Right.
is this even the right approach?
Right. So, you know, if we turn this over to the Berkeley group, you know, they would work on it themselves, and then they bring it to us, and we would have a whole different flavor on it.
You might?
We will.
No, I'm sure.
I guarantee we will.
Yeah.
You know, so it seems like to me that it would be, the most practical thing is to go through this with your help and Art's help in a couple of work sessions and create a document that the public can understand and then put it out for a public hearing.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, give it to the Berkeley group and they work on it someplace behind closed doors for 3 or 4 months, and then give it to us, and we're gonna scratch it all up and chew on it and for 3 or 4 months, and, you know, and then another 2 or 3 months we have to revise it. So we're a year down the road, so why don't we just tackle it ourselves for 2 months and get it ready for a public hearing?
Yeah, I think Art and I agree, and the most important thing
Agree
is
with
I think we agree.
Is what I just said?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And that, but we want to make sure that before we get too far down the line, that the core essence of what is allowed or not allowed,
Yeah.
you know,
The
kind of
core
fits.
essence that you're talking about is the law. And the law is not open for.
But you don't have to allow, you can be much more restrictive on what kind of temporary signs, how big.
Yeah.
And that's
all
work
that
session.
stuff you
It really
can-
comes down to the size, really.
Sure.
You know, it's
Sure,
all this- yeah,
size and number
size.
and location,
Size matters, you know.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So I'm happy to do whatever you guys, want. You wanna point out anything else tonight, or what do you wanna do?
I'm just curious, I gotta believe that the hay bale sign stuff is totally a creation of our stuff, or was that taken, does anybody else talk about?
No, I don't, I
signs?
can't imagine that is, I think we're the epicenter of hay bale sign ordinance language.
So again, I think to Mr. Henry's point, obviously, that represents sort of thought and creativity and, you know, attention to local concerns. So I gotta say, having not had much time to look at this, I agree with Mr. Henry. This is, you know, really the first sign of encouragement I have seen on this topic since we've started discussing it. It seems like up to this point, it's been a one-way ride downward, rather than back upward. And I feel like this is within visible distance of where we want to be. And I really appreciate actually that you put it in terms of scratching through and marking up what was already here, because I absolutely agree that one of the problems we were having was just getting our minds around the transformation of what we had to a new framework. And I totally agree.
Yeah, Mr. Kohler did a lot of work earlier, and I'm sure came to a near parallel to some of the stuff that Art and I eventually came to probably a year and a half later.
But it is harder to see it that way because you don't have a direct markup. And, you know, this way you can see, and again, with all respect, and I agree and greatly appreciate what Mr. Kohler did earlier. One of the challenges with that is you didn't see it necessarily in terms of the straight markup. And some of these additions I think are very helpful. So I agree. I also don't support getting the Berkeley group involved with this. I think, I don't know that I would want to limit our focus just to the highlighted areas, but I take your point.
Oh,
that
yeah,
those are-
some of those are blank
those
right
are
now, we just
clearly
didn't put
within-
numbers in because.
Right. And I think work sessions are the way to go.
Okay. Gary, do you have a calendar for the courthouse for maybe,
Not on me now.
okay. I suppose we could call a work session later, right? Notify everyone and advertise it. We don't have to settle on it.
The planning commission has a little bit special rules for calling, but it's like 5 days instead of 3 days or something like that, so, yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking it'd be helpful maybe before our next, I don't know if I'll, before your next meeting in January.
Yeah, I mean, we had one of those kind of lameish dock work sessions last year, I recall. I think it was last year. Like you said, COVID time years, hard to know what they are.
Let me just look at a calendar really quickly. Are you all okay with, taking this home over the holidays and, you know, sitting in front of a fire and reading this for hours and mulling it over? And then we
Sure. Again, I might just throw in there, I agree with what Mr. Henry and Mr. Light have said about the Berkeley group, except that I can see at some point might be helpful just to have them as sort of outside counsel to, excuse me, to kind of just give a reality check to it all. I think Art and Gary have probably done a fantastic job here, but as long as we've got them, there might be some value at some point, you know, before we reach the end here and just having a glance over it. I don't know what others
It's
think of
similar
that.
to the diagnostic work they're gonna do on the rest.
Right.
It would probably be a good idea to make sure to have them read the entire ordinance.
Yeah.
Including this, just to make sure we're not regulating something we shouldn't, or not regulating something maybe we should, in a way that we should.
Okay, how about Wednesday, for now, Wednesday the 12th at 7 PM for a work session?
Pretty much 7 PM, any evening here at 7 PM, there's no county meeting, is very likely couldn't be available. Court doesn't.
Okay, so let's assume that'll work unless you hear otherwise.
And I don't see any other county meetings that would be on the schedule.
Okay. Let's just formalize that by way of a motion.
You're saying 7 PM?
Yeah, 7 PM, the 12th of January.
So that's just before your next regular meeting?
Yeah, which is, I'm looking at the calendar right now, understand the,
Would be the 19th.
yeah,
The way
third
to do
Wednesday.
That would be to continue this meeting to that date, time, place specific, and then you can avoid the name
Okay,
announcements and all that.
all right,
Would there be any tolerance for perhaps starting earlier than 7?
sure,
Maybe 6?
sure.
I feel like work is easier
Yeah, I agree.
sometimes, but I don't know if folks have
That's-
conflicts. I think
I have conflict, I won't be here.
either way, or
I'll be in Iceland.
Oh, good for you.
We'll set it.
Can we go there?
I like that idea.
I'm sorry, I missed the date.
I'll bring it with me though.
Looking at the
We're talking Wednesday, 12th of January.
January.
I don't know, I mean, we'll obviously check our schedule.
Okay. Well, if there's any uncertainty about his availability, or it sounds like the space is available, I mean, we could just adjourn tonight and then advertise a,
You can't, it's easier to continue. your
okay,
meeting.
okay, all right.
If you never convene that night, then it automatically is adjourned when your next regular meeting will happen.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so Gary, or,
I move that we continue tonight's regular meeting to Wednesday, January 12th at 6 PM, subject to availability of the facility and, can we say?
it should be fine, you don't even need to put that on
Okay.
there. Yeah,
For the purpose of reviewing and, working on the
yep, just,
sign ordinance.
okay, motion to continue tonight's meeting to 6 PM on the 12th of January.
Yeah, is that subject to Art's availability?
No.
But it's just date, time, place, as long as it's here, 6 PM.
Yep. Second, anyone?
Sorry.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
And we both, I apologize for taking so long.
No, that's great.
It's really helpful, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're done.
Well, before we, are we about to adjourn?
We're not adjourning.
We're not adjourning. Well, I would just like to say to Mr. Whitson, thank you very much for having served as our chair for this year. It's, you've done a great job in keeping us focused, and it's a hard job sometimes, so thank you.
Thanks.
And also, frankly, to my other commissioners, fellow commissioners, thanks. It's been very helpful and a good learning experience to work with everybody this year. And also to the community for, even when individual people come out just promoting their own application, it's all for the good of what we each think is for the good of the community. So I just would like to thank folks for the past year from my perspective, and wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday and all that, and Happy New Year, and thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.